My father cried exactly once in my life that I saw. I was 9 years old. Standing in the hospital hallway when they told him his mother wasn't going to make it through the night, he turned away from us, pressed his forehead against the wall, and made a sound I've never been able to describe to anyone. I didn't fully understand it then. I understand it now. I'm 38 years old, and I've been a physical therapist for 11 years. I don't make the kind of money people assume when they hear the title. I drive a 2017 Honda that needs new brake pads. I pack my lunch 4 days out of 5, and for the last 4 years, every dollar I didn't spend went into an account I named in my banking app simply the house. My parents, Norman and June, got married in the summer of 1974 in a church in rural Kentucky that doesn't exist anymore. My father spent 34 years driving long-haul freight routes from Louisville to wherever the dispatch board sent him. My mother worked the front desk at an orthopedic clinic for 26 years. They raised me and my younger sister Bethany in a 3-bedroom house in Clarksville, Tennessee, with a carport that never fully kept the rain off the car, and a backyard my father mowed every single Saturday morning regardless of the weather, because that was just something he did. They were not people who had extra. They were people who made enough stretch to look like enough. My mother's one recurring dream. She told me this when I was maybe 12, sitting on the back steps with sweet tea while my father was on the road, was to live somewhere she could see trees from every window and hear nothing but birds in the morning. Not the highway, not the neighbors, just birds. She'd said it the way people say things they know will never happen. Factually, without bitterness, as if she'd already made her peace with it. I hadn't. Their 50th anniversary was going to fall on a Thursday in September. 50 years is not a small thing. 50 years is two people who chose each other every single morning for half a century, through the lean years and the hard years and the years when my father was gone 3 weeks out of 4, and my mother held everything together alone. It deserved something real. Not a card and a dinner reservation. Something that said, "We saw what you gave and we didn't forget." 14 months before their anniversary, I found a listing for a property in Sevierville, Tennessee. 4 acres. A farmhouse-style home with a covered porch that wrapped around the front and one side. Hardwood floors, 2 bedrooms, a sunroom addition off the back with windows on 3 walls. From the kitchen window, you could see a tree line so thick it looked painted on. The listing said the nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile down a gravel road. The asking price was $312,000. I had $201,000 saved. I'd been putting money away since my daughter was born, and I realized, in the specific way new parents sometimes do, that I needed to stop coasting and start doing something on purpose. I took a second position doing weekend home visits for a private rehab company. I picked up 1 extra shift a month at the clinic. I stopped pretending I was going to renovate my bathroom and put that money in the account instead. Over 4 years, I got to $201,000. I talked to my credit union. With my existing savings as a down payment, my income and my credit history, they pre-approved me for the remainder. I called the listing agent on a Tuesday afternoon, standing in the clinic parking lot between patients, and made an offer. They countered. I accepted. The only person I told was my husband, Philip. We've been married for 9 years. He is, without qualification, the steadiest person I've ever known. He heard the full plan, the purchase, the surprise, the logistics, and his first question was not, "Are you sure?" or "Can we afford this?" His first question was, "When do you want to fly your parents in?" His parents are a different story. Sandra and Roy Beaumont have been part of my life since Philip and I started dating at 30. They are not unkind people, exactly. That's what makes it complicated. They say the right things in the wrong tone. They ask questions that are shaped like concern but function like criticism. Sandra in particular has a talent for framing her disapproval as helpfulness. When Philip and I bought our house in Nashville, Sandra told us we'd overpaid. When I went back to full-time after having our daughter, she expressed concern, very warmly, very gently, about whether children raised in daycare really get what they need. When I mentioned that I'd been saving for something for my parents, she nodded and said she thought it was sweet how close I was to my family, in a voice that made it sound like a personality quirk rather than a virtue. I had learned to absorb it. Philip would apologize afterward, and I would tell him it was fine, and mostly it was. They were not malicious. They were just people who believed, on some foundational level, that what belonged to Philip was a family asset, and what I built independently was a pleasant addition to that asset. I did not think about that when I asked them to help coordinate the anniversary surprise. That was my mistake. Not trusting them. I didn't fully trust them. I just underestimated what they were capable of assuming. Here's what I asked them to do. Philip and I had already furnished the farmhouse and staged it ourselves over 2 long weekends in August. The plan was to drive my parents up from Clarksville on the morning of their anniversary, under the pretense of attending a small family brunch at a property owned by a colleague of mine who needed someone to look it over before listing it for sale. My parents trusted me completely. My mother even offered to bring a dish. What I asked Sandra and Roy to do was drive up the day before, check that the flowers I'd ordered had been delivered to the porch, make sure the lights I'd strung along the fence line were working, and leave the key under the ceramic pot by the back door. That was it. They called me that evening to confirm everything looked beautiful. My mother wore a yellow blouse the morning of their anniversary. My father put on a sport coat that still fit him the same way it had 15 years ago, which impressed me more than I said. He is 73 and still works in his garden every day, still walks 2 miles every morning before breakfast. My mother is 71 and still alphabetizes her spice rack, still sends birthday cards by mail, still says I love you at the end of every phone call whether she's talking to me or to the electric company's automated line, because she sometimes forgets she's on hold. The drive from where they were staying to Sevierville took about 40 minutes. My father rode in the front seat and pointed out every piece of farm equipment we passed, as if naming them for the first time. My mother held my hand from the back seat for the last 15 minutes of the drive, not because she was nervous, but because that's what she does. She has always held my hand. We turned down the gravel road toward the property, and I felt the knot in my chest that I'd been carrying for months start to loosen. I'd spent 14 months making this happen. The flowers were supposed to be on the porch. The lights along the fence were supposed to be glowing even in the morning, just because I thought it would look beautiful. I'd framed 43 photographs spanning my parents' entire marriage and arranged them along the hallway wall. I'd ordered a cake from a bakery in Knoxville that my mother had mentioned once, years ago, that she'd always wanted to try. What I saw when we came around the last bend in the road was not that. The porch was there, the farmhouse was there, but the flower arrangements I'd ordered, a cascade of yellow roses and white hydrangeas, because those were my mother's favorites, were gone. In their place were 2 folding chairs and a cooler that I didn't recognize. The strings of lights along the fence were gone. And Sandra's car was in the driveway. I stopped the car without fully meaning to. My mother said from the back seat, "Oh, is someone already here?" Before I could answer, the front door opened and Sandra stepped out onto the porch. She was wearing what I can only describe as a hosting outfit: pressed linen, pearl earrings, an expression of enormous self-satisfaction. She came down the porch steps the way a person descends a staircase they consider their own. My mother opened her car door first, smiling, still believing this was a tour of a colleague's property. She got 4 steps up the front walk. Sandra stopped in front of her, looked past her to the car, and said, "And I need to be precise here because I've replayed this moment more times than I can count." She said, "Oh, June, I'm so glad you could make it. We've been getting this place ready all morning. Wait until you see what we've done with the back room." My mother blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The sunroom," Sandra said, already turning back toward the door. "Roy found the most beautiful curtains at an estate sale last weekend. I told him they were meant for this house." My father had come around the front of the car by then, and was standing next to my mother with his hand on her elbow. Both of them looking at each other with the particular expression of people who are trying very hard to be polite about the fact that they have absolutely no idea what is happening. I got out of the car. I don't know what my face looked like. I know what I felt. I felt the 14 months compress into a single point behind my sternum. I felt every Saturday I'd worked instead of rested, every vacation I'd declined, every conversation I'd had with my credit union and my listing agent and the bakery in Knoxville, all of it pressing against the inside of my ribs. I walked past Sandra without speaking and went into the house. Roy was in the sunroom. He had in fact hung curtains. Ivory curtains with a floral print that were perfectly nice and had absolutely nothing to do with the house I'd furnished or the space I'd prepared or the parents I'd prepared it for. He'd also moved the small writing desk I'd placed in the corner, a piece I'd found at an antique market in Franklin, specifically because my father likes to do crossword puzzles in the morning, to make room for a floor lamp that appeared to have come from their own home. I stood in the doorway of the sunroom and looked at Roy. And Roy looked at me, and the particular quality of the silence between us told me everything I needed to know about how much he'd known, and for how long. "Nora," he said. He has always called me by my middle name, which is not how I introduce myself, but I stopped correcting it 6 years ago. You didn't tell us what furniture you had planned, so we brought a few things to fill it out. Roy, I said very quietly. Whose name is on the deed for this house? He opened his mouth and then closed it. Because mine is, I said. And I'd like you to tell me when, in any conversation we have ever had, I gave you permission to move furniture into my house. He didn't have an answer to that. He looked at his shoes. I went back outside. Philip had arrived by then, having driven separately from Nashville. He was standing at the foot of the porch steps, having apparently taken in the scene in the last 30 seconds. And his face had gone the kind of still it goes when he's processing something he doesn't want to believe. My parents were still on the front walk. My mother's hand was pressed against her collarbone, the way she holds it when she's trying not to cry. My father was standing very straight in that way he has, the way that looks like stillness, but is actually the physical manifestation of a man keeping himself under very tight control. Sandra had moved back to the top of the porch steps and was explaining, at some length, that they had only wanted to make sure the house was welcoming, that family should have a stake in something this significant, that she and Roy had been so touched when Philip mentioned I'd found a property and they'd wanted to contribute. Philip held up one hand. Mom, he said, stop. She stopped. This house belongs to my wife. She purchased it with money she saved over 4 years, working extra shifts without anyone's help and without asking anyone's opinion. She bought it for her parents for their anniversary, and I am standing here right now trying to figure out why their first experience of this property was being greeted by you rather than by her. Sandra said, Philip, we were only… No, he said, and then he said it again, quieter. No. He turned and looked at me, and something in his expression asked a wordless question, and I answered it with the smallest nod. He went inside and started carrying things out. Roy helped him. He didn't say anything, but he helped, which I suppose was the only apology I was going to get from him. Lamp first, then the curtains, still on their rod. A small side table that wasn't mine, 2 throw pillows in a color I would never have chosen, a basket of decorative items from somewhere that had been placed on my kitchen counter. I went to my car and got the flowers I'd kept in the back seat as a backup. A smaller arrangement I'd picked up from a gas station florist 2 towns over, not the cascading roses I'd ordered, but something, and I carried them up the porch steps and set them on the railing. Then I went to my mother. She was still on the front walk, and her eyes were wet, and she was looking at the house, and I knew from her expression that some part of her had already started to understand, even though I hadn't said the words yet. Mom, I said. Nora. Her voice came out very small. Whose name do you think is on the deed for this house? She looked at me for a long moment. Then her hand came up and covered her mouth. 4 years, I told her. I started saving the month after Lily was born, because I kept thinking about what you told me when I was 12. About birds in the morning. About not hearing the highway. My mother made a sound that wasn't a word. My father beside her took one slow step forward, looked at the house, looked at the tree line behind it, looked at me. He said, Nori. He has called me that since I was small. I haven't been small in a very long time. It's yours, I said. Both of you. Your names are on it. Nobody can take it. My father put his arm around my mother. She pressed her face against his sport coat. He looked at the tree line for a long time without speaking. Roy and Sandra finished loading their car in near silence. Sandra paused once at the bottom of the porch steps as if she might say something and then seemed to decide against it. The car doors closed. The gravel crunched. They were gone. The 4 of us, me, Philip, my mother, my father, stood in the driveway for a moment in the quiet that followed. My mother lifted her head from my father's shoulder and looked at me with the expression she's worn my whole life when she's trying to hold herself together for the sake of whoever is in the room, the expression that means she feels more than she'll say. Inside, I said. She laughed. It came out half sub and fully real. The photographs were still on the hallway wall, right where I'd hung them. 43 frames. Their wedding day. The hospital the morning I was born, my father holding me with the specific careful terror of a man who has never held anything so breakable. Bethany at 2 days old. Christmas mornings in the Clarksville house. My father standing in front of various freight trucks across 3 decades. My mother at her clinic desk, at the beach, at my college graduation in a hat she'd bought on sale and been delighted by. My mother walked down the hallway slowly, stopping at each one. My father followed behind her. Neither of them said much. They didn't need to. The cake from Knoxville was in the refrigerator. I hadn't known if the morning was going to hold together long enough to get to cake, but it did. We sat on the covered porch. My parents, Philip, and me. With plates and forks, and the kind of conversation that happens when people who love each other don't need to narrate everything they're feeling. My father asked about the tree line. I told him there was a trail through it that came out at a creek. He nodded like this confirmed something he'd suspected. My mother asked whether the porch got afternoon sun or morning sun. I told her both, depending on which side you sat on. She turned her face toward the sky for a moment, like she was testing it. Later, when the cake was gone and the afternoon was getting long, my father walked to the edge of the porch and stood at the railing looking at the trees. He stood there for a while, not speaking, not needing to. I have seen my father cry once in my life. I wasn't watching for it this time, which is how I caught it. The quick tightening of his jaw, the way he pressed his lips together, the single blink that didn't quite clear what it was supposed to clear. He didn't turn around. I didn't make him. Some things don't need to be witnessed to be real. Some things are allowed to just be. My parents moved in 6 weeks later. My mother reports that the birds in the morning are, in her words, absolutely ridiculous, which I have learned means perfect. My father finished installing raised garden beds along the sunny side of the house before the first frost. He calls me on Sundays now, which he never used to do, because he says the quiet in the mornings makes him think of things he wants to say. I don't have a relationship with my in-laws anymore. That's not a dramatic statement. There was no ultimatum, no confrontation beyond that morning. It simply became clear that Philip and I shared an understanding of what had happened and what it meant. And that understanding did not leave room for pretending it hadn't. Sandra sent a card in October with a brief, carefully worded note. I read it and I set it down and I thought about my father standing at the porch railing looking at the trees, and I felt nothing I needed to act on. Philip and I still talk about it sometimes. Not often. He has never once suggested I should have handled it differently, and I've never asked him to. What I think about most, when I think about that morning, is not Sandra stepping off the porch, or Roy standing in the sunroom with someone else's curtains, or even the look on my mother's face when she understood what she was standing in front of. I think about my mother at 12, sitting on the back steps with sweet tea, telling me about birds in the morning like it was a fact she'd already put away. Like it was a small thing, like wanting something quiet and green and yours after a lifetime of making do was too small a dream to even call a dream. It was not a small thing. It was never a small thing. And 4 acres of Tennessee hillside with a creek trail through the tree line and a porch that gets sun on both sides says so every single morning.